everybody. Welcome to another episode of Secure the Seat Live. I'm your host, Minda. Happy that you're here. I know you could be anywhere on the internet right now, and you're here with us. How was your weekend? If you're watching us live, I know many of you watch throughout the week, so you catch the replay, but let us know how your weekend was. I hope that you did something that brought you joy. I know last week we talked about peace, so we're bringing that same energy of peace into this week. And so if you didn't get a chance to watch last week's episode, or you missed any of our past episodes, you can always go to our YouTube page, subscribe, and put in Secure the Seat Live, and you can catch all of the past episodes. So sometimes when you listen to something a second or a third time, it just hits differently. So happy Monday. I'm excited to be here with you today because we are talking about You Are More Than Magic. It's my first young adult book with Penguin Teen. It comes out tomorrow. We're going to drop the link in the chat. If you are part of an organization for teens or have friends, or you're in a PTA or any of those things, make sure, let's get this book into the hands of our Black and brown girls. But not only that, really, this is for everybody. And so thank you so much for all your support of the memo and Right Within. And I hope you will do the same for You Are More Than Magic and read it with somebody you love. I know I had done an interview last week about it with MSNBC Latino, and one of the women who interviewed me, she's 25, and she got an early copy of the book, and she's like, wow, I needed this book. And so I know that even as adults, there'll be some things that you'll find in here. So again, happy Monday, happy that you're here. We're going to drop the links in the chat so that you can get your copy before by the end of the week, maybe. If you haven't placed an order, pre-orders matter. They matter for the lists and all the things. And so I'm just so thankful. So listen, today we're going to do something a little bit differently. We're going to talk about You Are More Than Magic. So I hope you'll enjoy the little conversation. I'm going to read a little bit from the book. This is what it looks like in hardcover. So excited, so beautiful. And it's an easy read. It's a practical read. I would actually say that this is the memo for young girls, essentially, when I think about it. And yeah, so let's jump into it. I'm going to read a little bit from the first chapter, and the section's called Why Wait? When I wrote my first book, The Memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table, I thought about all the lessons I wish I had learned before I entered the workforce. I quickly realized that I needed some of these life lessons way before entering corporate America. Soft skills like understanding your worth, finding your voice, and learning to navigate systems that produce bias. Black and brown girls need that information right now. And if you're wondering what soft skills are, those tend to be things like communication skills, active listening, and things like time management. But in my opinion, there is nothing soft about those skills. We all need them. When I was traveling for my first book tour, I looked into the crowds of like minds and faces and saw women bring their daughters and nieces to my book talks. They'd whisper to me, "Gotta teach them young." I met fathers who purchased the book for their infant daughters so they'd have a manual when they reached our age. It struck me that we should start having these conversations much earlier. I saw myself in their eyes. How much more hopeful would I have been back then when I was struggling with being the only Black girl in my classroom in Illinois, if I had a big sister to guide me, if I had someone to remind me that everything I need is already inside of me? What if I had the language as a young Black girl to help me articulate my place in this world, even when others questioned it? I wish I had known I could use my voice as a teen and that I didn't have to wait until I became an adult. If I had been encouraged to do so, I would have been a force to be reckoned with. Our minds are continually challenging the status quo. For better or worse, the world shapes who we become. I need you to know that you don't have to sweep your feelings under the rug to appease any group of people. You are the next generation to set this world ablaze, and we shouldn't wait to address the issues that face you later. It might be too late then. I need you to have the tools to show up in this world and be your brilliant self today. Because as our mutual friend Beyonce said, brown-skinned girl, I wouldn't trade you for anyone else. I don't want you to ever feel like you need to be anybody else. I need you to know that your feelings matter, and the world needs to know that too. Oh, and trust me, future you will thank you for doing the work now so you could rock it out later. So that's just a little bit of Right Within. I'm sorry, Right Within. You Are More Than Magic. There's definitely elements of Right within the book, and so I'm just excited to get this book inside the hands of our girls. I'm just super excited. When I recorded the audiobook a few weeks ago, going through it, I was just like, wow, I just can't wait for them to read it. I at first was kind of like nervous about writing a young adult book because I'm like, am I too old to be talking to teenagers? I think I'm still cool and forever young, but can I really talk to them in the ways that they need to? And what I found was that I just took the approach of being like the big sister, right? We're having a big slumber party, and we're gonna keep it real and talk about what's going on. And many of us as teens, our voices were silenced before we even became adults. And so this generation, they have a lot of thoughts, they have a lot of ideas, and we want to cultivate those in the right ways. We want to dismantle any imposter syndrome that might be trying to creep in now because it can't go where they're headed. And so to give you a little sneak peek, before I bring Mike on, he's going to ask me a few questions about the book to give you all a little more sneak peek. But the one thing I wanted to invite you to is on April 6th with Cafe Con Libros, we're having a book party, a launch event. So bring your girls, bring your sons, bring your nieces, nephews, whoever. So we're going to talk about it on a larger scale. Book tour will be a little different this time because mostly I'll be going into organizations that support young girls of color and talking to them. And so join us for the big online event on the 6th. So we're going to drop that in the chat. And so without further ado, I'm going to bring my partner in shine, who's typically behind the scenes, but many of you have gotten to know him if you show up here every Monday with us. But Mike, would love to invite you to the stage.
What's up, Minda?
Hey, brother, how are you?
I'm blessed. I'm doing really well. Thank you so much.
Good, good, good. So let's get into it. Let's talk about You Are More Than Magic. Let's give the community, the squad, a little insight. I know you have some questions that you want to ask me about the book. So let's do it.
Absolutely. Minda, you talk in your book, your new book, You Are More Than Magic, a lot about dismantling imposter syndrome. And you just mentioned it just now. If you were to have a conversation with Black and brown girls, what would you tell them about not letting imposter syndrome creep in and be a part of their life?
Absolutely. I know for me, when I was younger, imposter syndrome would show up. So to backtrack a little bit, when I was younger, my family used to live in Southern California, and we moved to a rural town when I was like 11 or 12 in Illinois, and it was a culture shock. At the time, Michael wasn't even born yet, but we moved there, and it was a shock because I went to enter into a classroom where I was the only Black person, only person of color in my classroom. And so it was very different for me. I was not ready for that. And so when you enter into a space like that as a young adult or, a teenager, you don't always feel like you belong. I remember the first week that I started class, they were reading this book called Where the Red Fern Grows. And in that book back then, I don't know if classrooms are still having people read that book, but there was a couple of lines where they used the N-word. And to be in that class where students, and back then teachers would have their students read the passages out loud, right? Every student would like take a piece, and to hear white kids saying that like continuously in class, you just start to feel like you don't belong, or not seeing teachers that look like you, or, people seeing things on MTV and BET and then thinking you're some like magical Negro that all the dance moves, and just all of these things, you start to just question yourself at every single turn. And I didn't realize how I was already starting to question and internalize some of those things until I started to write my books. And I realized that some of that imposter syndrome started way back then. And so one of the things that I talk about in this book is no longer seeing yourself through somebody else. Right? Just because you are in a room with predominantly white or any other race or ethnicity or identity doesn't mean that you have to shrink, right? Imposter syndrome can't go where we're headed. They can't exist at the same space. And I also offer some affirmations in the book that I want people to, or that I want the teens to use, because you will enter in spaces where you might be the only one, but it doesn't mean you have to shrink, right? And I think this idea of kind of being chosen or liked, it's such at like a 10 at that age. So you're willing to do and forfeit all of your values so that people will like you. And some of the affirmations that I have in the book is, I release fear, anxiety, and anything that would try to stop me from being my best self. I honor my talents, ideas, and ability to control my own actions. My racial identity belongs to me, and no one can stop me from the progress because I control my destiny. It's just sometimes we aren't affirmed. If you are lucky enough to have good parents or guardians, you're affirmed in every way. But if you don't have that inside and outside the house, and even if you do have it inside the house, sometimes you're still questioning your place in this world. And so I talk a lot about imposter syndrome. I talk about when I was a teenager, I tried out for the basketball team. I tried out for the cheerleading team. Both times to be met with a no. They ended up going with, for the cheerleading team, they ended up going with all white girls. And, you know, you start to kind of question, do you belong in these spaces? Are you good enough? Are you pretty enough? Right? I know that I grew up constantly hearing, you're cute for a Black girl. I don't know if anybody ever heard that, but if you constantly are told those sorts of things, then you definitely don't always see yourself in the best ways. And so I wanted to talk about some intimate situations that I dealt with. I don't want to give you too much, just giving you the Sam's Club sample, but I just wanted to dismantle that, because one of the things that my mom and dad used to always tell me, or my mom used to tell us, me and my brothers, Michael will remember this, but as long as you know, right? No one else can dictate, you know, who you are and what your goals are. You get to see yourself for yourself through a lens of love, dignity, and respect. And I think it's so important for us to talk about some of those things and not sweep them under the rug, right? Because how many of us as adults, we have learned to sweep things under the rug, and we don't want to pass on those same tools to our young girls to just sweep things under the rug. As we say a lot here, you can say what you mean without saying it mean. And we want to be able to make sure that we equip our young girls with the same tools to be able to create boundaries with their friends and with their coaches and their teachers and with their guardians as well.
Absolutely, Minda. Those are some awesome gems of knowledge. Also, just you talked about hearing the word no and not letting it define you, and you mentioned that in the book, also the new book, You Are More Than Magic. Can you kind of expound on that, how that kind of affects teenagers? Because we're still in a world where adults control everything. Adults control our political views. Adults control, you know, how we view the world, especially at that age. And can you talk and kind of expound on what the word no does to a teenage mind?
Yeah, I think sometimes as teenagers, at least in You Are More Than Magic, I'm trying to drill down into the idea that if we get a no, it's not tied to our worth. It's not tied to our self-worth, right? If somebody else says no to us, doesn't mean that we are less than or not deserving of it, right? And no is not the end of the story. So I mentioned that I tried out for the basketball team, I got a no. I tried out for the cheerleading team, I got a no. At that point, I could have said, you know what, forget it. I don't want to do anything else. I'm throwing in the towel. But the reality is sometimes we don't get the yes because we didn't work hard enough, or because we're not, because we don't have everything on our resume. Sometimes the no is race related. And I wanted to drill down into that, especially in spaces that they're in, that it doesn't mean that they're not good enough, right? And that their worth is not connected to how somebody views them, right? And so one of the things when I didn't get the no, or when I didn't get the yes for basketball and cheerleading, I was devastated, more so for basketball, because that was something that I was really passionate about. But I realized that I didn't have to tie my self-worth to somebody saying yes to me or not, right? And I think that that's something, that idea of being chosen, I think sometimes that wanting to be chosen. And if we're not chosen for the team or for the date, for the prom, whatever it is, then somehow we start going down the rabbit hole and thinking that there's something wrong with us, right? And I want to get that. If any of you have read my books, you know that I talk about the enemy state of mind versus the empire state of mind, right? We can't continuously be feeding ourselves negativity, right? We have to feed ourselves that positivity. And I talk about shifting mindset for these young girls, right? And so one of the things that, and that's flexing our resilience. And so talking about what resilience looks like even at their age. And even though I got those 2 no's, I decided to try out for student council. Any student council alone? So I pushed myself one more time, right, to go after something that I wanted. Again, I couldn't control what the teachers did. I couldn't control who the coaches thought was cute and who could do the best flips. But what I could choose at that age is what I decided to do and how I handled my situations going forward. And I talk about a time where I got those 2 no's, but then I decided to run for student council secretary, and you had to have the whole school had to vote for you to get this. And I remember, and I tell a story in the book that I talk about it all the time with you all, but at one point in time, I was very nervous about public speaking. And even at that young age, I wasn't necessarily comfortable about it. And one of the things that everybody who was running for student council had to do, Mike, is that they had to get up in front of the whole school in the auditorium and tell everyone why they should vote for you. And I was even shorter in junior high school than I am now. And I remember getting up on the stage and the podium was like up here and the microphone was up here. And so there was no little step stool. And I just remember making a joke out of it. And I reached up and grabbed the microphone and went to the side. And, I gave the best little speech I could give about being student council secretary. And what ended up happening is I ended up getting all the votes, or majority of the votes. And I became probably one of the first, I definitely that year was the only Black person on the student council the whole time I was in junior high school. But it was just that one more time, right? We get a lot of no's, but our yes is waiting for us around the corner. But again, not tying our worth to the no. And I'm sure there's some adults out there that need to hear that. Just because you didn't get the promotion, just because the raise didn't come through, or the direct deposit didn't hit when you thought it was, or whatever it was, we don't have to tie our worth to how somebody else views us and their yeses. And I think the earlier we could start to dive into that, then we don't let that imposter syndrome creep in. Then we don't looking for validation for other people, because we know what we have is already inside of us. And when we do get the yes, it was nothing magical about it. We earned it. We deserved it. So.
Yes, absolutely, Minda. Really good stuff. Annette put in the chat, mighty and tiny. I like that.
Yes, Annette. I'm still mighty and tiny, I think.
Absolutely. Minda, what you just said leads into our next question. You talk about difficult conversations in the book. And one of the things about what I feel is why some teenagers shy away from difficult conversations is because as teenagers, they always feel like they're in trouble. If they share their feelings, trouble is going to happen. If they share how they actually think about a certain family member, trouble is going to happen. And this mindset of getting in trouble has kind of hindered a lot of teenagers. And can you kind of talk about some of the things you explain in the new book about having difficult conversations with adults or people in general? Can you kind of expound upon that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought back to being a teenager and how like worried I was at times to have certain conversations, right? And we all have a voice. We just have to decide how we want to use it. And the one thing that I think, especially in Black households, that tends to happen is, at least, and I think maybe some households are a little more progressive these days, but we teach our kids to be seen and not heard, right? We say those certain things where they're already like, or shut up, speak up, all the things, like we're giving them mixed messages on when they can use their voices. And I think that sometimes we have those conversations with our kids because we don't necessarily, as adults, have the tools to have a healthy communication style, right? And so what would it look like to hear the teen out, we may not agree with what they're going to say, but we at least want to create safe spaces where where we're the ones they're coming to, right? I remember listening to our former First Lady, Miss Michelle Obama, say one time that she has very open and honest conversations with her daughters because she don't want them going to their little friends for the advice on things that could change the trajectory of their life, right? And she may not want to hear it, but she wants them to know that this could be a first stop for us to have the conversation, right? And so the tools that I use or that I offer inside of You Are More Than Magic is saying, okay, so you want to have this difficult conversation. What could it look like? Let's think about some factors. First, thinking about what is the outcome that you hope to get out of having this conversation, right? So start to think about that. Practice. What is it that you want to say, right? Sometimes we just like launch into a conversation, and maybe we also have to think about timing. Do we want to have this conversation with our dad when we know that they just had a really hard day and they're walking right through the door? Do you think that that is the time you want to have this conversation right now? Or letting them get inside the door, relaxing for a second, and then having the conversation and saying, I have something that's going on with me and I really need a good listener right now. Could we talk? Using certain phrases, right? Or maybe, as Mike, as you said, some trouble happened at school that day. Hey, Mom, there was something that took place today. I'm not really proud of how it happened, but I'd love for you to hear it from me first, right? Giving us certain language to be able to do that. And then on the flip side, giving our guardians or parents or teachers language to be able to hear us out, right? Because we don't want to silence their voice, and we don't want them to feel like they have no one to go to when these hard conversations are being had. Because listen, if you don't have the skills to have these conversations when you're a teenager, it's harder even when you're an adult to have these conversations. And so that was one thing. I talk about one situation in the book where there was something that I had to talk to my parents about, and I was really nervous about doing it. And I ended up writing a letter to them because I wasn't able to actually have the conversation myself. I was scared, right? Not because of necessarily anything they said or did, but just because of the content of it, right? And I gave the letter, and then it opened up dialogue to have a deeper conversation. But letting teens know that there are multiple ways to articulate how we're feeling, and we want to foster that, right? We want to create those safe spaces. It's not just cool to have safe spaces in the workplace, but what does psychological safety look like inside the house, right? And so I also have reading guides in the book for adults to be able to engage with their teens around some of these conversations. Because listen, it's hard as a teenager to come to your family sometimes about things like sex or drugs or alcohol or any of the sorts, right? And so we want to be able to create those environments where they're not fearful to have those conversations, because if they're fearful at home, they might be fearful in the classroom, they might be fearful in the workplace. And so I want to get ahead of some of these things before they catch up to them later on.
Absolutely, Minda. Those are great points. And I think everybody has it in their mind that we're all safe, right? You hear people saying, why didn't you just come to me, boy? Why didn't you just come to me? Girl, you should have came to me first. I would have. And we all have like backwards compassion. When we find out somebody was hurt by it, we say, why don't you come to them? But I think, your guidance in this book to help adults also have conversations with our teens is going to be very beneficial to our community. So again, the book is You Are More Than Magic, and please continue to pre-order. I have a few final questions for you, Minda. This has been so awesome. Why did you dedicate an entire chapter to friendship in your new book?
Ooh, listen, friendship, okay? How many of us have them? There was a song, there's friend. I felt like friends needed to be talked about as a teenager because oftentimes, again, we want to be liked so bad, right? Being liked is like the main ingredient in school at times for many people. And I wanted to talk about forfeiting your values for being liked, right? And so I talk a lot about friendship, the different friends that I had throughout the years. There was one friend that I call Candy in the book that I grew up with. And my parents would always say, I think Candy's using you, right? And at the time, I couldn't see it because I'm like, we have so much fun together, right? You know, we go out, we have fun. I don't see how she's taking me for granted. And then through some stories that I tell about Candy, they were absolutely right, right? But at the time, I couldn't see it, right? Because but I found that she was only coming to my house because it was close to her boyfriend's house. And then once they broke up, she moved on to another one. But you're like devastated at that age, right? Because you want to be liked. I also talk about what it's like to be a good friend and what you should be looking for in a good friend. Because let's be honest, there's no class for friendship. Many of us either mess it up and we have no friends. You know, whenever there was one friend that I have as an adult, and when I first met her, she told me, you know, I'm not good at making friends with other girls or other women. And I always find that interesting when women say those sorts of things, because that means that there was something in the past, more than likely, that makes them feel like they can't be good friends with other women or other girls. And I talk about the beauty of having relationships with other women and girls and how important that is. Our success is not a solo sport, right? And even having girls that look like you. I talk about when we moved to Illinois, I was the only Black girl in my classroom, but for 2 years there were these two Black girls that were there, that I call Kendra and Stacy in the book. And when I was with them, we got to wear our Black girl braids with the beads at the end. We click clacked, you know, together. It just felt some sense of solidarity, right? And having those friends that look like you and that you don't have to explain every single thing all the time to your white classmates. It was just everything. And I talk about a friend that I call Mara in the book. She was a white girl, very, you know, you can even make friends with white women too at a young age. That's safe and healthy, right? And so I talk about what do healthy relationships, friendships look like, and what are ones that you need to stay clear of, right? So for example, if you have friends that are always taking from you, right? Or they tell you, if you do this for me, then I'll save a seat for you. Then friendship should not be conditional on what you do for someone, right? And also how they make you feel. Having good, healthy friendships should fill you up, not take away from you. I think about some of the friends I had growing up, and because they were popular and I wanted to be with the popular kids, that I dealt with a lot of stuff that didn't always make me feel good about myself, right? Just to be chosen, just to be liked. And I really get into and get under the hood about that so that we actually have choices. Quality over quantity. My grandmother used to say, Minda, when you're older, if you're lucky, you'll be able to count all your friends, your good friends, on one hand. And when she told me that as a teenager, I didn't believe her because I'm like, oh, I have all these friends, you know, and we're going to be friends forever, right? And as you get to know people and you start to figure out what your values are, even at that age, you realize that they're not all aligned, right? And that some friends you can't take with you. And so in some of those friendship breakups hurt just as bad as a relationship breakup. And so I talk a lot about that, what healthy looks like and what toxic looks like, because I don't think we all often know. And I think also too, Mike, sometimes teens don't want to hear it from their parents or their guardians, but they might hear it from me, right? You know, so just adding another layer in there. And I think even as adults, right, if we don't really have friends, or we have a hard time making friends, what is it that we might need to be doing to also show? What was the other thing I was going to say? Yeah, quality over quantity. Once I realized that it's not how many friends you have, but the quality of your friends, right? So I would rather now have than having 20 friends back then where we're all felt like we were popular and cool. I'd rather now have 3 good, solid friends who know that when I laugh too hard, I might need my inhaler, right? And they're even a good friend that they might have an inhaler for me in their purse, right? Because they know me. Right? And so talking about some of those things that we just don't often get a chance to drill into, I just wanted to really have that moment to say, hey, here's what's important, right? And I want you to know about it now, because you deserve good, healthy relationships, no matter if it's romantic or platonic. And when we have certain values and standards, then when people approach us or want to date us, then we also have these boundaries already set and ready to go.
That's wonderful, Minda. I liked what you said about when people come to you and say, I can only get along with guys, or I I think those confessions kind of hinder us, don't you think? Like if a woman comes to you and says, I don't do well with other lady friends, those kind of things, they mess with our mindset really. So that's some awesome knowledge you dropped on us. One final question, Minda. Beside teen girls, who else did you write this book for?
Yeah, I'm just so excited about You Are More Than Magic. If you haven't got a copy, I would even say if you don't even have any teens, read it yourself, because I definitely dig it. If you aren't tired of the Memo and Right Within yet, go ahead and pick up You Are More Than Magic for yourself. But I wrote it in a couple different buckets. I wrote it for teens, black and brown, but I also think young kings should be reading this book as well, because sometimes they don't also have the language that they need. So I think this will be a great book for the house. I think I wrote it for parents to be able to engage with their teens, because it's such a critical age to be able to have these conversations and have real good, healthy dialogue, around some of these topics that are hard, right? Especially around race. Because I think if we have the language to do that, and if we don't know how to do it, there's questions that I have for adults to be able to read it with your teen or someone you love, to be able to have those conversations about some of the things that we talk about. So I have questions at the end of every chapter for the teen to be able to process, but then I have reading guides in the back for adults to be able to engage with the teen about the book. And then I have a reading guides inside the book for our allies, because I want them to be reading this book with their teens too. Because the issue is, I write about one story. I had a friend who called me a tar baby when I was a teenager, and it stung and it hurt, right? That was one difficult conversation that I did not know how to have when it happened. So I cut it off and moved on, and now, knowing what I know now, maybe I would have handled that situation differently, because I didn't have the tools at 13 to be able to engage with a white girl calling me a tar baby who I thought was my friend, right? But where did she hear that from? Where did she hear that from? So when we talk about allies, we need to be creating good allies as teenagers, so that when little Scotty says tar baby to their black classmates, we don't want him saying that to calling her an angry black woman when he gets to the workplace, right? So parents, guardians, definitely be reading this book with your teen, so that they understand how to show up in these settings when they have classmates that don't identify the way they do. And then lastly, teachers, let's have a conversation. Just because you teach everybody in the class doesn't mean everybody's experiencing the classroom the same, right? I, being the only in many of my classrooms, there was a couple teachers who were singling me out, and my dad had to go up to the school and have some conversations on occasions. You know what I'm saying? So all of these things are happening, and I just think that the more we are equipped to help our teens, then we know that they're more than magic, right? We know that they deserve everything, and that everything they have is already inside of them. They just need the cultivation. Then finally, Michael, any people who are fostering or adopting Black and brown children, oftentimes I'll hear parents say, well, we teach them to see no race. No, they are beautiful in Black and brown. You need to surround them and talk to them about who they are and how beautiful their culture is. And this is an opportunity for you to also read that book along with them, so that you can provide them the guardrails, because the world sees race, right? And we want to make sure that seeing race is not a negative thing. It's a beautiful thing, right? That's who we are. That's how we show up as. And so having the language to be able to do it, I'm really proud of this book. I want to thank Penguin Random House Style Books for saying yes to this book, to my agents, to my editors, because it really is a special book. And one last thing I want to say about friendship, Michael, is when I was not having a lot of friends that looked like me growing up, I ended up going to a college where I found some really good girlfriends of color that really nourished me and supported me. And when I was recording this book, and Mike knows two of them, I talk about two of my good Black girlfriends, Jamie and Liz. And a couple of years ago, Liz passed away. And, having those friends that love you, support you, that see you through everything, I'm just so glad. And I also talk about that excuse me, getting emotional about it, about Right Within, because having people who get you is so important. People that you could talk about the things, those safe places, those sisterhoods. So when I hear other Black girls say, well, I don't deal with other Black girls, or I don't deal with other brown girls, you find those spaces where you can love on each other, you know? And it's just such a beautiful thing when you can find those healthy friendships. And so writing about Liz and Jamie is still alive and well. And, you know, Liz passed away in her sleep a few years ago, and I'm just so thankful that that I had that, because it's a privilege to have good, healthy friendships, and I cherish that so much. And that's why I had to talk about it, because our young girls are the future. They deserve to know what's possible for them, and I don't want them walking through this world thinking that anything is wrong with them or that they don't belong. And so we just got to be reminded of those things. And I know that Liz is shining down, and she'd be really, really happy. She passed away a little bit before the memo came out, and I'm just thankful. So in the book, I talk a lot about that relationship. Actually, one of the silly things, but silly then when we did them, but all three of us got tattoos because we had a crew back in college called the Silver Dollars. You have to get the book to know the reference, but so whenever I have it on my ankle, we all got them. And so whenever when people see it, they think it's some like guy's initial or something like that, but it's actually my group back then. And I'm just so thankful that I had that. And I hope that even as adults, you find that you find community, because community is everything on this journey. Because it's a lot when you have the confirmation hearings, when you're having those struggles, whatever it is, having that group, having that squad, it's more than magic.
I love it, Minda. That's such an amazing moment. They say in the church, take your time, baby, take your time. When you take your time, that was such a beautiful moment. Liz and Jamie are beautiful souls. So thank you so much for sharing those stories and those awesome questions you answered. Is there any more you'd like to share about the book before we move on?
Listen, this book is special for so many reasons. I wish that I had a book like this when I was 14, 15. I know that things panned out the way that they should for my life. I'm very happy with the woman that I turned out to be. But had I heard some of these things earlier, think about how much more dynamic and bold. And I would have really walked into every room owning it, because I didn't have to see myself through the eyes of someone else, right? And I think we have to have the tools to be able to know that we can think differently, that we can show up differently, that we can disrupt status quo. I don't want our young girls having to engage in status quo. I want us to disrupt it. And I want us, who is there to root them on, to have the tools to be able to do that, right? Because they might come to us with some things that we aren't ready to hear, to have some conversations that we weren't prepared to have. But we want them to have that safe space to land. Having a safe space to land is a beautiful thing, and it's a privilege. Not everybody has that safe space to land. And so we want to make sure that they do, because it's concrete out in these streets, okay? We want to make sure that we're providing them with those pillows to land, to have the conversations that need to have, and to remind them that they belong in every room they enter. And when that room is not showing them the dignity, humanity, and equity and respect that they deserve, to be able to have those conversations that they need to have and create those boundaries and find those friend circles to help them move forward, to add to their life, not take away.
Wow, wonderful, wonderful. If you're listening to this, please share this on our YouTube link and also on LinkedIn. This was such a beautiful show today, and we want to end it with our April new affirmation. I'm really excited. Last month we talked about we're being right where we're supposed to be. This month, our affirmation is I am made for this. Sometimes we have to continue to tell ourselves, I was made for this. I am made for this. I am created for this. Whenever difficult things happen in our life, I was made for this. And I want to leave you with that today. And please put that in the chat. And as always, let's continue to promote this new book, You Are More Than Magic, as Minda starts this virtual book tour. This company and this family would not be where we are without the supporters and our partners and all you all. So please, let's push this book and get this awesome teaching out into the world. And I'll give you the final word, Minda. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike, for sharing the screen with me today. Thank you to all of you for listening and creating the safe space with us every Monday. This is a space for you. If it's your first time with us, welcome. If you rock with us every week, welcome back. You are family, you are squad, you are community. I appreciate you. It takes a lot for us to be what we are, and don't let anybody tell you that it had anything to do with luck or magic. You were right. What was the affirmation, Michael? Say it again. I was made for this. Oh, wait, we were made for this. Sometimes I question myself, what journey I'm on, how did I get here? And I was made for this. And so I thank you to each of you for everything. We're going to drop 2 more links in the chat. 1, to pre-order the book wherever you like to buy your favorite books. Number 2, on April 6th, I'm having a book launch with Cafe Con Libros. They're a Black-owned bookstore. So let's support them. Bring your teens. Tell people about it. We're going to drop the link. Register. Let's have some more conversation. I didn't want to give you too much today, but just a little sprinkle. This is a special book. I would have to say, I look at this book as like my Jay-Z Black album. You know, I can't tell you that I'll write any more books after this. I don't know that that is the case, but if I'm going out with this is the last one for a little while, I'm really proud of this book. I'm proud of all of my babies, and I want to thank you all for all that you've done. And I just want to hope that you have a very good day, a good week, and keep securing your seat. We'll see you next week.